All right, we'll get started. Thank you so much for attending this session about chatbots, a practical use of AI for training. I'll just briefly introduce myself and get right into the content today. I really appreciate you attending. My name is Vince Hahn. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Mobile Coach. We're a chatbot company. But I've worked in and around corporate training since the year 2000, have an MBA, have done multiple startups. I'm really fascinated and passionate about technology that's practical. And so with that, we'll dive into the content today. So what is a chatbot? A chatbot is a computer program. It's designed to simulate conversations with humans. Now, when we talk about artificial intelligence, that's been in the news and dominating the tech news for, I don't know, it's been many years now, but it really seems to be hyped up in recent times. And I find that most talk about artificial intelligence is futuristic. And I find that most of my own interactions with artificial intelligence is actually quite frustrating. I mean, raise your hand if you've ever been, if you've dialed an automated system and the automated system is trying to help you, trying being the key word, and you end up very frustrated. I mean, raise your hand if that's been your experience. So that's everybody. Also with artificial intelligence, I use Siri. I have an iPhone, and I know on Android you've got Google Assistant. Siri doesn't seem to be as useful as Apple tries to make her seem. My kids will use Siri as more of a novelty. They'll ask Siri questions like, where do I hide a dead body? And she has really some fun. There's some Easter egg type of fun things in Siri. But I found that I've trained myself to know what Siri can do and what she can't do. What she can do is she can dictate a message for me. I've learned how to slow down my speech enough to have that be useful. But it was a really frustrating learning curve for me. And she's pretty good at navigating around Apple Maps. But when I ask her for more useful information, oftentimes she can't really help and maybe just ends up suggesting that I go to Google instead. And so oftentimes the promise of artificial intelligence is ahead of actual practical use. So the history of chatbots actually, and so we're going to talk about chatbots today, which is this automated simulation. The first known chatbot, or the first chatbot that was actually documented, was done by Dr. Joseph Rosenblum from MIT in 1965, a program called ELIZA. For those of you just coming in, I did warn you that my slides are hard to read, and so if you want to move up front, feel free. But I'm going to try to dissect this for you. So remember, 1965, okay? This is a simulated chat experience. And so let's see if my pointer can work here. So ELIZA is a psychotherapist. In 1965, she's a computer. Please describe your problems. Each time you're finished talking, type RET, which is the return button on this 1965 computer. Hit that twice. Okay, so this is again MIT, 1965. So in this simulation, the user said, I have a terrible headache. So then the program said, maybe you should consult a doctor of medicine. I am a psychotherapist. What does it say? Psychiatrist. So basically what Dr. Rosenblum did was he did a list of pre-programmed keywords. And so anything that was sort of medical in nature, and obviously headache was one of those keywords, triggered this response. So you can kind of see how the program was designed. And so the user said, okay, I'll do that. So now the user's thinking, is this a real person? I'll be more conversational. And then, okay, ELIZA was very confused by that response. Okay, I'll do that then. So ELIZA said, can you elaborate on that? Which really now makes no sense. So this is where it starts to break down. What are you talking about? No, I can't elaborate. See you later. This is what the user was saying with some frustration. Why do you say that? So you can just kind of see where now the user experience of simulating a human conversation starts to break down because it was a little bit too complicated, even though the English that the user was saying really wasn't that complicated. So this is, again, 1965. Chatbots have, in some respects, have come a long way, and in some respects have not come a long way in those years. Raise your hand if you've used Slack, or if your organization used Slack. Okay, so just, that's actually pretty good, more than I had expected. So Slack is an online collaboration tool for teams, and Slack has really, since about 3 years ago, sort of was as the flag bearer for chatbots for online collaboration tools. And so they have some out-of-the-box bots for these teams. And so if you're collaborating on Slack, so if you don't use Slack, it's sort of like it's sort of, I don't know, maybe like a Yammer, you could think of that, or a Skype that's embedded in a web browser. And you can chat with each other and collaborate on projects and whatnot. And so when you see a list of people on your team, you can also see these chatbots that are available to interact with. So there's one called an Office bot. And so Celeste, who's a user, could say, hey, Office bot, please add espresso beans to the grocery list. And the Office bot says, done. There are 4 items on the grocery list. And so the key words that you can just, what I want you to try to understand with chatbots is it's not magic. Artificial intelligence is not necessarily magic when you want to make it really useful. So it's useful just to step back and say, how's the automation happening? So grocery list is the key word here. So that's what this Office bot is good at. One of the things the Office bot can do is keep a grocery list. So please add espresso beans to the grocery list. It's not too hard to parse. So there are 4 items on the grocery list. Celeste says, oh, also add ice cream. So you can see you got it. There are 5 items on the grocery list. So you can see now it's not hard for this automation to say there were 4 items and now there are 5 items. Is this useful for Celeste to know that there's 4 items or 5 items? Maybe, maybe not, but there's some intelligence in here. The other thing that a Slack bot can do, there's another Slack bot, it's called Slackbot. One of the things you can do is have it give you reminders. And so I did this on my computer a couple months ago and took some screenshots of it. I asked Slackbot to remind me to go to bed. So Slackbot said, I will remind you to go to bed in an hour. And I said, thanks. And Slackbot said, of course. So that's pretty easy. It's pretty easy to program a chatbot to understand what thanks means. So, of course. And then one thing I didn't like about this experience is that I logged off of Slack, and so then my reminder came via email, and the email looked like this. And I don't know about your inbox, but my inbox is very easy to ignore and lose things. And so I had to kind of go find it later on, like, oh yeah, I was doing these screenshots for my presentation. Did Slackbot ever text me? And Slackbot did email me, but it was buried in my inbox. But the automation did work. Sure enough, Slackbot woke up an hour later, it gave me this reminder. Okay, let's keep going. So Facebook has a messenger. Facebook has a separate app. They decided a few years ago to require everybody that has a Facebook app. I don't know if any of you were frustrated by this, but they made a decision that if you wanted to send someone a message through Facebook, that you actually had to download Facebook Messenger. So now there's 2 separate apps. And remember when they did that? It used to be just in the Facebook app. Now you have to have 2 apps. You have to have Facebook and you have to have Facebook Messenger. And shortly after that decision, they released their bot framework. So you can now go into a Facebook SDK and build bots for Facebook Messenger. And a lot of big brands have experimented with it. And it's been up and down. Last year, Facebook did a report to say, hey, our bots are wrong about 75% of the time. Well, that's kind of that's being wrong a lot. And you saw brands really get into it and then pull back because they saw that the practical efficacy wasn't quite there, while others are doing a nice job. So I'm an American Express holder, and I actually like the American Express chatbot on Facebook. And so I wanted to show you how that looked. So you go in there, and of course you have to sort of settle your trust issues with the internet. So I have to go in and tell Facebook that authenticated to my American Express card. They have to know they shake hands with my username and password. And so that's how now it understands who I am and what my card number is. So with Facebook Messenger, I get these alerts. But one thing that Facebook Messenger app or bots do well is it allows the brand to have these interactive menus for their bot. So that reduces this problem that ELIZA had and that Slackbot had, like what if they don't understand what the user's saying? So here, there's some things that the American Express chatbot can do. So I can go in and view my account balance. I can come in and see special offers. So yeah, I guess I'll let them try to market to me a little bit for this service. I can manage my settings for different notifications. Now, one of the downsides when I enabled this, I also have the American Express app. So anytime I use my card, I got like 5 different alerts from everywhere. And so I had to go in and turn some alerts off. But If I wanted only to get alerts through Facebook Messenger, then I could do that. I could manage the settings to do that. And anytime I use my card, then it'll actually, the message will show me the details of the charge, which I think that's been a nice service. So most of this user experience is just pushing buttons and telling the bot what services I would like to receive. So that's the American Express Facebook bot. I live in Utah. I'm a Utah Jazz basketball fan, and they have a Facebook Messenger bot too. And in fact, the NBA, this is the NBA's bot, and you can choose your favorite team. And again, there's a lot of buttons, and so I could come in here and say, what highlights would you like to see from the Utah Jazz? Top plays, do you want to see highlights from the last game? And, is this valuable? Could I get this content elsewhere? Sure, I could go to ESPN, or I could go to some news channel and go to their website. But there's something about messaging that removes steps that's more convenient. And you'll see this as I go through my presentation, that the innate value of a chatbot is that you're actually meeting people where they are, and where they are is messaging. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I find this to be less clicks than going to some website and navigating to what I want, and I can just have the accessibility of the content here. So here I experimented with the chatbot. Instead of pressing the button, I just tried typing enable alerts to see if that would work. Sure, it worked just fine. So now here's an example of a chatbot through SMS. And so the chatbots I showed you, Slack, ELIZA, and the American Express and the NBA chatbots, I would call passive chatbots. And a passive chatbot is waiting for the user to do something. And so one thing that I find, there's two modes where I think chatbots can be very useful in corporate training. One is if in passive mode, you can think of that as, could you create a chatbot for performance support? Meaning the chatbot's just going to sit there until the learner says, hey, I need some help. Where am I going to go for that help? And right now, what options do they have? Well, you might have some online resource. That means they have to remember the URL for the LMS or for that online resource. It also requires them to remember that darn password, which no one seems to remember. And those things, while conceptually easy, you'll find by your conversion rates of how many people actually go and utilize those online resources tend to be bigger obstacles than we'd like them to be. And so that's the first mode, is sort of, could you create a chatbot to be passive, to be waiting, to be 24/7, performance support for learners when they need some additional resources. The second mode would be programmatic. And what I mean by programmatic, I don't mean like code programming. I mean more like TV executive programmatic. So thinking about, every Friday we're going to release an episode and here's the story arc. So could I create a chatbot that actually has a story arc? So every Friday afternoon this Friday I'm going to send this message that has a certain meaning and purpose, and next Friday I'm going to send another message which has an additional meaning and purpose, and can I program an experience that's driving a conversation towards some learning outcome or some business outcome. So those are the two modes that I'm very interested in chatbots being of great efficacy for learners, programmatic and passive. So here's an example of a programmatic chatbot. Again, I apologize if this is tough to read. You can get the slides, or you can move up, or you can just bear with me as I try to read these for you. But so here's a chatbot named Coach S, saying, "Hi, I'm Coach S. I'm gonna help you." In fact, I can't even read that. I have to go back here. I'm going to help you have great one-on-ones with your team. So in this particular scenario, can we design a chatbot that's going to help a manager improve maybe the quality of their one-on-ones and the frequency of their one-on-ones with their direct reports? So sort of a leadership soft skill use case. Could this programmatic chatbot also be smart enough to cater to the learning style of this manager? So how often would you like to receive messages? Once a week, every other week, once a month? So again, going back to the ELIZA example, you can see how you can break down sort of a decision tree and make a chatbot just smart enough to feel valuable to the user. So then this particular user says once a week would be great. Got it, I'll check in next week, and then weekly from there on. If you ever need to change the frequency, text back frequency. So you can see, again, it's not as smooth as a real person, But again, we're trying to add some value through automation. All right, so then what could a programmatic message look like? Like, so one of the coming Fridays, what could that look like? Well, want to see some example agendas for holding a one-on-one with a direct report? Sure, that'd be great. That's particularly good if this is a new manager. Okay, well, here they are in a PDF. Now, you might have these resources, again, somewhere hidden away in an HRIS system somewhere or on an internet somewhere. Again, requiring the user to not only recognize that, oh, I have a need, but then to sort of think through it and then go and navigate and try to find it, or you can push it out to them. And so this is one of the advantages of a chatbot, because we're meeting people again where they are. They're already messaging, and so you're having a chatbot join their circle of messaging friends, and if you can do that successfully, you'll see a lot higher engagement, and that's the idea behind a chatbot, is higher engagement. So here's another example of what a programmatic sort of message could look like. Let me ask, as you reflect on the last month, how would you rate the quality of your one-on-ones? I haven't had any, very good. And so again, the user, you're implying to the user that, hey, I'm an automated chatbot, but you can answer conversationally. And so the user says probably a 3. And today's day and age technology should be able to interpret that type of natural language. Whereas in 1965, maybe ELIZA would have struggled with that a little bit. Okay, thanks for saying so. Can you give me some feedback on how I or our L&D team can help? So a chatbot can also, if you're meeting people where they are and it's conversational, it can also be a wonderful survey tool, because it's a lot easier to, oh, yeah, I can tell you how you can help me, or I can give you some feedback. It's a lot more conversational than getting an email inviting you to click on a Survey Monkey, going out and filling out a survey. Hopefully you can see that. So if you can pull this off, you'll just see greater engagement because of ease of use. So one of the powerful benefits of a chatbot, again, and I've said this again, I'll reiterate it maybe 1,000,000 times, is again, meeting people where they are is sort of a prerequisite to user engagement anyway, right? So that's the whole purpose behind a chatbot. So why use a chatbot for training? Just as sort of a summary of all these examples I showed you. The conversational user interface gives you the best opportunity to overcome what I call the choose to engage barrier. So I'm going to describe that a little bit for you now. So here's a typical engagement for what I call a destination site. So I call a destination site either a website or an intranet, something that you need your web browser, or an app. So both of those are the same. So even though an app might be slightly more accessible, it's still a destination because you have to purposely go to the app. So in Mary Meeker's, she does a annual State of the Internet PowerPoints. I would highly recommend following her. It's very, very fascinating. Last year in her State of the Internet report, she reported that on average, adults in the United States, on average, have about 40 apps on their smartphones. Raise your hand if you have more than that, if you think. Okay, raise your hand if you have less than that, if you think. And so the average is about 40, it seems like. She also said what was really interesting is that out of those 43 apps, 3 apps enjoyed 80% of our attention. And then if you expand that to like 5 apps, it's sort of like 95% of our attention. So in other words, a lot of those apps on your phone just sit there. Raise your hand if you've turned off push notifications on some or all of your apps. So that's most of us. Because a lot of times app providers get too greedy with push notifications. The minute you get a push notification that doesn't feel valuable, you want to turn it off. And so that also condemns that app, ironically. They're trying to engage you in their app, and ironically, they do make the product decisions to actually make it disengaging. And so we have all these apps on our phones that go unused. In fact, there's some statistic that shows the number of apps that are downloaded but never opened even once is actually remarkably high, where you go, yeah, I'll download that app, and then you just forget about it. So that's why an app I include as a destination site, because it is a destination. And so this is a sort of a common, this is generalized, of course. There could be exceptions, but day one, You get a bunch of users. Day 7, you have less users, and day 30, you have less users. So if you think about any important website initiative that you've rolled out internally, you might have seen a pattern like this. And one of the reasons is that each required click is a decision that is easily curtailed by other things. I once had a meeting with an executive for a large cable company. They were a cable internet company, and he told me that in their statistics on their web pages, any time that they had a click to go to a shopping cart or some checkout to get some services, each click they lost 10% of their audience. So if something took 5 clicks, by the time they had 100 people, by the time the 5th click came around, they were down to 40 or 50 of those people. So sort of the same thing here. So this is what we call the choose to engage barrier, is that I might know the resource exists, but where is it again? Oh, I'm already distracted. I'm going to go check my messages on Facebook, or I'm going to go to some other YouTube or some other type of social media or game or something like that. So one of the challenges that we have as corporate training professionals is that we're in sort of the productivity space, right? The things that we do are supposed to help people and help them grow and develop. And when you talk to them, they'll say, yes, I want to grow and I want to develop. Give me resources. But when they're on their own, they're playing games. Because we're competing with the value proposition of anti-boredom. And the value proposition of anti-boredom is easily filled by your Facebook feed, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and games. And so the bar is a lot higher for us to make something compelling enough for them to, okay, I'm going to set those things aside and do something good for me. And so that's another dynamic of the choose to engage barrier. So why use a chatbot for training? Meet people where they are. And so you think that, well, we have this mobile app, it's great for learning. Sure, people are bringing their phones with them everywhere, but as I just said, a lot of your apps are not being used, and so where people really are is messaging. If you just anecdotally think to yourself, how much more engaged am I with my messages, my text messages, than I am with my inbox? And for most of us, it's not even a comparison, right? Because the people that are texting us or messaging us are people in our close context, family members, friends, colleagues, and typically the messages that are coming in have a higher contextual value and collectively. And if you look at your collective inbox, there's stuff that's urgent and important, but there's a lot of stuff that isn't. So collectively, it's just less valuable. So we all are committed to our messages. I've done this speech for the last couple of years, and when I ask this question, I will admit, has started to change. So I'll ask the question, and I'll tell you how it started to change. Right now, when you went to bed last night, how many people had 0 unread text messages? Okay, how many people still had unread text messages? All right, so that's about 75-25. 2 years ago, 100%. 100% never went to bed with unread messages. So our messages inbox is starting to get busier, so we're starting to get a little overwhelmed there, and that's going to continue to trend, I think, as people start figuring it out. But still, it's overwhelmingly. Now, I'll ask you this question. How many people had 0 unread emails in their inbox? I mean, wow, impressive. Some of you, that's very impressive. Okay. All right, so a programmatic, so we talked earlier about this passive chatbot. I want to talk a little bit more about programmatic chatbots, because I think this is a really exciting development in chatbots. So a programmatic chatbot, if programmed well, so this is an image of your target user, someone that you care about. So let's say this is your target learner, and they're surrounded by a circle of friends and family and colleagues. And it's a mixture. It could be friends, and it could be colleagues, and it could be it certainly could be neighbors and whatnot. If you design a programmatic chatbot effectively, if this is me and this is my buddy Brad, whether Brad's sending me a message or my chatbot is sending me a message, I'm going to give it like attention. And just think about that for a second. You're going to have some learning resources that's going to get you sort of similar attention as a real person. So that's sort of the bar that you would like a chatbot to achieve. If you could achieve that, you now have a platform to really influence this behavior. So we talk a lot about the forgetfulness curve, right? And this is sort of a little controversial, but sort of the statistics out there, the statistic that's out there that has been a little controversial is sort of how much do we forget. So without debating the statistic, we all forget. And so the statistic out there that I think is cited often is 30 days after a classroom, you've forgotten 90% of what was taught. All right, well, maybe that number is too high. To any extent, we do forget. There's no question of that. And so if you can now have a platform where you're going to get this person's attention for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, I don't know how long, then, boy, you can really go a long way to mitigate that forgetfulness, as well as figure out how they're feeling, keep your finger on the pulse of that learner, and push out new updates and things like that. So that's sort of the promise of what a chatbot could do, which I think is very exciting. So I ran a Facebook Messenger project in my office, and I want to describe this to you a little bit. So one of the problems I have, we're a small startup, technology startup, and we have a pretty technical product. And one of the ironic things about, this is me sort of telling you, having my heart on my sleeve, is that I want my team to use our product more. And they get so busy that they don't kind of use the product as much as they should. And so I thought, well, why don't we eat our own dog food? Why don't we create a chatbot to try to get them to use the product more? Now, I'll say that we have staff in functions where they don't need to use the product. So people in sales and marketing, they don't really need to use the product like our product analysts do. But I still feel passionate about, hey, everyone in our company should know how to use our product. So that's what we did. We created a Facebook Messenger project. And so what we did is that we're in a small office that in a historical building that's like over 100 years old. And everyone in our office is convinced that there's a ghost in the office. So anyone that's late, in the office late, there's always these sounds. There's one legendary story of someone was in the office late and they saw this woman walk into the office, walk into the bathroom, and never come out. Okay, and so we called this ghost Shirley. And so we decided, let's put some personality behind this chatbot, and we'll call the chatbot Shirley. We'll create her a Facebook page. And so there's Shirley right there. And so we created this chatbot, and we asked all our employees, go like this page and start messaging Shirley. So I'm going to show you how we did this. So the project goals were to increase competence in using our own software among our own employees. We want to quiz them on knowledge as well as strategy to teach and remind. We gamified it. So I have a staff of millennials. They're very competitive. So gamification turned out to be very effective. And we wanted to have them be accountable to personal goals. I wanted each of them to say, within your job function, tell me what's a reasonable goal for you to work on learning our product more, and then I'm going to hold you accountable to that. Or this ghost Shirley is going to hold you accountable to that. So the design of this was, we only had 12 participants, so it was kind of a small number, and the end was small, but we did it for 4 weeks, and we programmed Shirley to be a programmatic chatbot, and she was going to send staff messages 2 to 3 times a week for 4 weeks. So weeks 1 and 2 was all about quizzing and gamification, kind of start out with a bang, get some fun. Week 3 was just pushing out reminders, and week 4 was holding people accountable to their personal goals. So how did this work? Let me just show you a little bit of what this looked like. So here's Coach Shirley introducing herself. Hi, I'm Coach Shirley. Over the next month, blah, 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 just describing how it's going to work. I found that because it's automated to clearly communicate what the chatbot can do and what the chatbot will do is a big deal. If I'm subscribed to an automated service and I'm not quite sure when messages are going to come, I'm really nervous about that. So, like for example, when I get automated messages from my dentist office, I'm like, whoa, how did you get my phone number? Please stop sending me these messages. I know when my dentist appointment is going to be. So being very clear up front about these messages that we find to be really important. And so we did a little quizzing. And then if someone got an answer right, we rewarded them with a fun animated GIF, which turned out, it's amazing how much a virtual badge or a virtual sort of something that's funny can give people real delight. It really helped drive that engagement. So we did a lot of animated GIFs. So here's another quiz. Hey, what's the hour difference between UTC time and Mountain Time? We deal with a lot of time zone issues. So the right answer was 6 hours, and then you get a little animated GIF. My PowerPoint didn't animate these GIFs, so you just have to see a still image. So you get an idea of what the user experience was like. More quizzing, more animated GIFs. So you can kind of just see this was the experience 2 or 3 times a week on Messenger. A little bit more. So then we had some gamification. So Coach Shirley said this week's winner is a tie. And then there was quite a bit of chatter as I was listening to people talk about this in the office about who was winning, what they had to do to sort of catch up. So the gamification was pretty fun. So let's see. Here's another example. Today's deep dive is a choose your own adventure. Which MCP stands for our technology. That's what our technology is called. Which MCP feature would you like to learn about? And so this was interesting for me to see what they chose. It helped me know like where the sort of knowledge gaps were. So I was watching sort of the reports and to see what people were saying. So you get the idea. So how did this work? How did this go? So I had a 92% high responder type. So I define a high responder as anyone that responded more than half the time. So 92% did that. 8% low responder type. No one was unresponsive. No one opted out, although we gave them the option to. And we had an overall about 73% response rate. So just if I would have done this through email, these numbers would be much, much different. If I would have done this over SMS, I might imagine the numbers would be even a little better because Facebook's turned into a tool for people my age. My team, not so much. So that was one piece of feedback they gave me. But still, pretty good numbers, pretty good engagement. I was very pleased with this. Here's some graphs. This just shows you some knowledge check response rates. So I could check for each question. I could see at the beginning we had almost everybody answering. And then sort of the engagement rate dropped off. And there was one question that did typically horribly. So I could go in and say, okay, what question just whiffed? Like, why? And then why didn't it work at all? Because you can see the next one was quite good. And so I could learn to see, okay, what's going to work with this chatbot for my audience and what should I avoid in the future? That was really interesting. Here's just some quiz results. I could then process the data. So one of the advantages of a chatbot is if you can get the data, you can start crunching some numbers to say, okay, for particular quiz results, how many people got it wrong, how many people got it right. This is the question I was showing you earlier, hey, what's a feature that you want to learn more about? I can get a sense of, again, what people were interested in. So I could see most people were interested in learning about custom fields. Some were interested in learning about support status. Line and Telegram. No one was interested in learning about support status. So, okay, that was interesting. I had the chatbot ask open-ended questions. So most of the examples of chatbots I showed you that I think are effective. So the ELIZA one, that was sort of didn't work very well. Avoid open-ended questions because, try having a real conversation with Siri. They've spent billions of dollars on their sort of chatbot, and you still can't have a conversation with her. Long ways to go before you can actually have a real conversation with a chatbot. But still, there's a time and place for open-ended questions. And so one of the open-ended questions I had the chatbot ask is, tell me a goal that you have. And so here are some examples of goals that my staff wrote down. This was really interesting for me. So a lot of this is very contextual to our software, so I don't expect you to fully understand it, but I want to give you a sense of what people answered. And they were very happy. They knew it was a chatbot. They were very happy to interact with it and answer an open-ended question. So, have you been finding time to work on your goal? So 7 people said yes, 3 people said no. I was very pleased with this because really what I wanted the chatbot to do ultimately was get people to spend more time doing something that they otherwise wouldn't have. That was the business goal that I had. So more accountability. Think of last week. How much did you work? How much did you work on improving your configuration skills on a scale of 1 to 5? So again, driving behavior, whereas without it we wouldn't have had the behavior. kind of go through this. So we were able to get, I crunched all these numbers, we were able to get 25% of the users to increase the time they spent. So that's pretty good for us because I didn't want them to, this was a business objective within reason. If you're in sales and marketing in my team, you shouldn't be spending 8 hours a day on our platform, but you should be spending more than 0. And so we were able to drive that type of usage, and this was a very successful project for us. We're now doing something similar, a similar test using SMS to compare the results. And so that's been pretty interesting. I don't have those results today yet because we're not quite done, but it's interesting to compare the results between a chatbot through Facebook and a chatbot through SMS and maybe some other channels as well. So lessons learned, key lessons learned, make it fun. Having it Shirley was a really fun idea. It gave it some personality. The gamification can be effective, although we got some complaints about it to say some of the people that knew the product the best were winning by such a large margin that it was actually a little demotivating. So we're changing the rules of the gamification to make it more fair and have it reset more often so that you're not feeling, I think that's what's tricky about gamification anyway, right? So tweaking the rules to try to get more people engaged and motivated. So the engagement goes beyond response rate. In general, getting people to think about what you want them to think about is really good. And whether or not they actually respond is a good piece of data, but what I found is that whether they responded or not, we were able to markedly and measurably increase awareness. And that was really the job of the chatbot. And so focus on iterations. So as I mentioned, we're starting our next 4-week challenge through SMS, and we're tweaking it based on what we learned. So the questions that got very poor responses, those are out. The questions that got high responses, we're going to do more of those, and iterating and trying to improve. So how do you do this yourself? Okay, so you can choose an authoring platform. You have to build a chatbot, and so I did a lot of Facebook examples today just because their SDK is pretty good, pretty robust. Now that does require you to get into their SDK, which means you have to have some technical wherewithal or have a team with technical wherewithal. But it's if someone does have technical wherewithal, it's not too difficult to author in Facebook. But Slack, you can author in Slack. You can Chatfuel's a do-it-yourself authoring tool. Mobile Coach is our company. We're an authoring tool. You can custom build one. Some people have resorted to doing that. And so once you choose an authoring platform, you pretty much design a script. And the script writing is sort of like, it's branching. It's decision tree-based writing. I'm going to show you an example of a script here in a second. And then you implement and you iterate. So here's an example of how we do a chatbot concept. And again, these slides will be available. So I know some of this is hard to read. But when we go out to design a chatbot, we ask ourselves, what's the strategy? What's the business objective we want the chatbot to solve? What should be the personality and tone of the chatbot? So we've done chatbots for millennials, and we've done chatbots for senior executives. They feel and sound very different, and they should. And the frequency could be very different, frequency and duration. You could have a chatbot that's texting someone every day. You could have a chatbot that's texting someone once a month. And so, it just all depends on the strategy. There's not a cookie-cutter chatbot design. What you do want to do is be very strategic. What do we want to accomplish? Who's our audience? And what frequency makes sense? What's the personality that makes sense? A quick story about personality. I had a client that had a very edgy sort of product, and so they had an edgy company culture, and so they were convinced that their chatbot needed to use profanity because their culture was full of, it was just part of their culture. And we were like, wow, we really haven't had good experience with that. And they insisted, we know our people. You don't know our people. And so we let them author a chatbot with a very snarky personality. They thought it was hilarious. Like when we wrote the script, they were just cracking up. Had some profanity in there. It took about 30 minutes of going live before we shut it down. So you have to, even though you think you know your audience, you have to really, get some experience here. And we shut it down because of complaints. Yeah. So then what I always like to do is I always like to write the first messages of what the chatbot would say and circulate that to stakeholders because that sets the whole tone of the chatbot. So the first thing I always write. So in this case, hello, I'm Coach Maury. Okay, here's a little, I'm stoked that you and I get to work on X together, so whatever the goal is. I'm sure we'll become experts at this if we put our heads together. I'm sticking around for X number of weeks. I'll send you X number of messages each week to help you stay on track. Text stop at any time to stop. Let's begin on Monday. So as the user, even though I know this is automated, I kind of know what to expect, and I know I can opt out at any time. So my experiences with sort of a programmatic training-based chatbot that's not trying to be too greedy and texting people every single day. So let's say texting people 2 or 3 times a week. You'll see less than a 5% opt-out rate. But I think if you didn't tell them they could opt out, it would be much higher. So that's sort of the next step, is to write an onboarding message. And in fact, if you want to sort of evangelize the idea of a chatbot internally, I would encourage you to write just what the chatbot would say to introduce itself to the users and circulate that, because that helps people. A lot of people have not even heard of a chatbot. A lot of people would say, oh, what do you work on? I work on chatbots. Well, what's that? And so they need something visual. Sometimes I'll even do a screenshot on my phone and show people an image. See, this message is coming from a computer, and this is what it would say. That's a nice way to sort of evangelize what a chatbot does. So you write the onboarding script, and then you put some sort of measurement plan together. We're all about ROI in this industry, and sometimes ROI can be elusive in training. Like, how do we get the data actually to measure ROI? But we should always have the conversation, and in advance, we always like to do 3 things. What users do. So we can measure this by response rate, opt-out rates. Like, how many people are opting out, how many people are responding. That's a very quantifiable measure. What do users say? So ask them, hey, how did you like the chatbot? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Did you ignore it? Was it helpful? So those are two very accessible ways to get data back to sort of measure the efficacy of your chatbot. Business results, achieving actual business goals of the coach. This is what tends to be traditionally very difficult, but if you have the infrastructure with the data, this is the slam dunk ROI is with that. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you have a hypo program, and you want a chatbot to mirror your hypos for 2 years. And you've got some baseline business data on how many VP level promotions are coming internally versus externally. Well, after 2 years, can you measure then that number changing? Oh, look, we're promoting more within, and one of the reasons is we have this hypo chatbot that's been helping our hypos. That's just one example of sort of having some business data to measure a return on investment. There's other examples like that I'm happy to talk about later if you want to come up and ask about ROI. I love the ROI discussion because I feel like that's a big void and something that the industry desperately needs us to get better at. Okay, so that's my presentation about chatbots and practical uses of chatbots in training. Any questions? Happy to take questions either. Go ahead, back there.
Sorry, way in the back. Paul Bradley from ClearLink. We talked a little bit about natural language, and in our world, we do mobile learning solutions that primarily focus on restaurants, retail, hospitality. So multilingual workforces, international workforces. Can you comment on kind of the state of natural language interaction as it pertains to either multilingual scenarios or individuals who are not primarily speakers?
Yeah. So great question. In general, I think natural language parsing has a long way to go, years to go. So the way that is effective is keyword-based. And there's a technology called regular expressions that can parse keywords, and that can be pretty effective as long as the question that you're asking lends itself to keywords coming back from the user. And that technology is actually fairly robust if those conditions are present. So I'm asking a question like, what time is it? So you're going to the answer array coming back, you're most likely going to be able to parse. Even if they say something's a typo, you can still do well at that. And you can do well at that in any language, in fact. You talk about multiple languages. What it's still not very good at is like, tell me about your day, or how are you feeling today? Anything where you're going to have like a million potential responses, that's a little harder. And I think we're years away from that. There are big companies working on that, but it's still very, very difficult. Yes, please.
Being completely new to this, I'm trying to understand how much time would go into developing something like a 4-week programmatic chatbot that's going to send 25 messages a week, how many hours of scripting that, how many developer hours with the SDK would be required, what else goes into that?
So the question for those of you in the back is, what's the resource requirement to create a programmatic chatbot? 4 weeks, 3 questions a week. How many hours does that take? Does it require developer hours? The answer is it depends. To write the script doesn't take long. You could probably sit down in a couple hours and figure out, 3 times 4, that's 12 messages that you want to write. And that part doesn't take long. Then, depending on the authoring tool that you choose, it could be very quickly, and what channel you choose. So if you choose Facebook or if you choose SMS, the authoring tools differ a little bit. If you had a technical resource available to you, it might take a couple days, that's 16 hours maybe of work. The key, though, is iteration. So the downside with the Facebook SDK is that you're sort of hard-coding your program. So, for example, week 3, the third interaction, if you ever want to change it, you have to go into the SDK into the code and change that. That can be a little bit of a pain, which is why having authoring platforms that are more WYSIWYG like ours, be careful not to make this a commercial, but that's the pain point that we identify is that, hey, what if you want to do a 12-week program in many languages and personalize it to the cultures of the different languages? All of a sudden, it could be a huge job. How do you make that easier? That's sort of the work that we do. But if you want to do something relatively simple, then yeah, I would say in a week with a developer resource, you could pound it out. Any other questions? Yes, please. What are the biggest mistakes that we see? The biggest mistakes that we see, I'd say the single biggest mistake we see is an over-eagerness to, people are going to see these messages, let's send them 200 million messages. Or to say, what are the goals of the chatbot? We want the goals to be X and Y and Z and A and B and C. So to get a little bit too over-ambitious. And so I would say that you still have to be very sensitive to the fact that people, because you're messaging them in their personal space, you want to respect that. And the number one goal is that if I, as the user, am getting an automated message, if it doesn't feel valuable, then it feels like you've overstepped your bounds. And so to really make sure, pick and choose be very disciplined with your script that you're writing, and listen to your user very carefully. What messages were valuable? What messages caught your eye, and what messages did you ignore? I'd say that's the number one. And that's the virtue of the other type of chatbot that we didn't talk as much about, the performance support passive chatbot. What's nice about that is that you're not pushing messages to people. People can just text the help that they need when they need it. Yes?
To your point there of not overextending, do you have a recommended number of messages you should send a person, say, in a week without being?
Well, yes, we found that you've heard me say 2 or 3 times a week. For anything in corporate training, we find that that's absolutely the max, unless it's safety and compliance. If it's safety and compliance and something technical, you can get away with like 2 or 3 messages a day, but not forever, for a fixed amount of time. But if it's something like soft skills or managerial or leadership or sort of frontline manager support, then yeah, anything more than 2 or 3 times a week, you're gonna get some negative feedback. Now, I will say the other argument to that is there are some use cases where you want your chatbot to be really effective at the risk that for some of your audience is going to tune out. So we've had some scenarios where the opt-out rate, I said earlier that we typically see opt-out rates less than 5%. There are some cases where an opt-out rate of 30% would be acceptable if the remaining 70% were really engaged. And so that's just a business decision that you have to make based on your use case. And then you're just very proactive to tell the users, I'm going to text you a lot, and I'm going to sort of be in your face as an accountability partner. I'm going to be your coach. And if you don't want it, just text up. It's totally fine. So if you could do that, then you might see a higher opt-out rate, but you could see potentially better business results for the people that really are looking for the help. Great question. There was a question back there?
I was just wondering, these are proactive chatbots that, as I understand it, how do
Mm-hmm.
policies, and then they can answer questions about it. They're more reactive.
Yeah, that's you're describing what I was using the term passive. So a passive chatbot is where you make it smart, and then it just waits for the learner to initiate a conversation like, oh, I need this or that. And so there's just some examples of a passive chatbot is like making a chatbot smart with scenarios about how to start a one-on-one. And so if I'm a new manager and I'm about to have a one-on-one and I'm not prepared, I could just tell the chatbot, show me those scenarios again. I could quickly scan them and like, okay, now I'm ready for my one-on-one. So things like that, or filling it with product details for sales training. So if I'm, let's say, I sell cell phones in an electronics store, I'm supposed to memorize 1,000 different parts. How am I supposed to do that? What if I can just tell a chatbot, oh, this customer's asking about this device, this brand, and this SKU, then give me some information. That's great performance support. So I see chatbots as performance support as a great use case. Yes, please. Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. Almost because chatbots are all done through sort of 21st century technology, data is very accessible. So, and that's great because even in the passive chatbots, it's great to see what are people asking. What are people wanting on the shopping list? Things like that. So, great data is available for that. Great questions. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you so much for attending this session. Again, you can download the slides. I'm Vince. I have business cards, and I'll hang around if you've got questions to ask me. But thank you very much. It was great to present for you and be with you today.